Oh yeah.
Hello, welcome back to our next session for today. We will now be doing the VR, AR, XR session as chaired by Mark Mears of InVeris Training. So I will hand over to him and let the session commence. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, just as a brief introduction, my name's Mark Mears. I work for InVeris Training Solutions. We're based in Ashford in Kent, but headquartered out of Atlanta in Georgia. We were formerly Meggitt Training Systems, and prior to that, FATS Firearms Training Systems. So what I'm going to talk about when I give my my explanation on AR, VR, and screen-based systems is obviously related to small arms training in effect. So, slides, where are we? Here we have the list of the panels that's going to be speaking today. Like I say, I'll give a brief overview in just a moment. And once I've done that, then we'll go through this in order. And at the end, the panel will come up the front. And then if you've got any questions, please ask them then. Okay, then, just to set the scene then, what I want to do at this stage is to go through some pros and cons, and this is my personal opinion now, on screen-based AR and VR systems. Now, we are fortunate enough in the company that I work for to have clients that use all of these three systems, and they come to us quite a lot to ask us, what would be the best system to use. So we provide them a number of points, and then we allow them to make the decision depending on the training that they would want to do. So let's have a quick look at what we're looking at then. So these are a number of considerations that we do bring up. And as I say, I'm going to mention projection-based AR and VR, and it's simply done in just a red, amber, and green. So along the top, obviously what they need to know is what sort of training they want to do: basic, advanced marksmanship, team, small unit drills, heavy weapons. I mean by crew serve weapons there as well, and obviously whether they want to fire or do indirect fire control. And if that is the case, then obviously they can be done on a number of systems, and then that's the answers that I've wrote down there to decide whether or not they would want to use projection, AR, or VR. In addition to the ones I've mentioned there, there's a few other options that we've got available, and that's whether or not they actually want to use the physical controls on a weapon if they're going to carry out marksmanship training, for argument's sake. Yep. Likewise, if they want to be moving around on a firing point or in an environment, some weapons are tethered. Yeah, so that was obviously negate that option. Other weapons are tetherless. So again, it's up to them to decide what they want to do, and indeed what system they want to do it with. I think a point that we all need to bear in mind, and that's what I noted at the bottom, is no matter what training system you're going to use, is what data that you're going to get back from them training systems. So, for example, as far as weapons data is concerned, obviously you're going to require the scores or indeed group sizes, whether you've got any weapon handling issues, and now then weapon handling issues are picked up. Hits and misses on targets, be it friend or foe. And then with the AR and VR systems, what is the field of view? Where is that individual looking? And as well as what the field of view is, where are they actually looking? Have you got eye tracking on this system? And I know on the AR systems we actually do the eye tracking as well. So we can be really specific, especially when you've got a team in operation, because you want to make sure all that area is covered. In addition to that, obviously muzzle flagging. Yeah, are they constantly moving the weapon, across their own forces? So again, can the system pick that up automatically? If so, obviously that's a bonus when it comes to the after action review. All this data is going to need to go somewhere. So where do we put it? You know, in our instance, we've got the ability to put this data into the cloud. So when it's into the cloud, then no matter where you are, you can download that data on an individual, and obviously that data would follow that soldier or soldier sailor, or indeed airman around. That also allows you then to do data mining, to go in, find all the information you require on this system, and obviously use that data to exploit your training. Yeah, and for UK amongst us then, I believe this is a big must when it comes to the land training system. So certainly things that need to be considered, but I think data collection is ultimately important no matter what type of training we're going to be doing. So the future, what do we consider the future of training systems to be? So when it comes to computer-based training, projection-based training, obviously, you know, we do see that as still a good market there for training to be done when it comes to weapon handling skills, drills, and marksmanship. They've got a weapon in their hand that's got form, fit, and function. We can find true ballistic paths. We have to work on the individual to make sure he's holding the correct weapon correctly, eye reliefs are correct, which is something that you can't do if you're an AR and a VR world. We still think there's growth in this market. Projectors are getting better and better all the time. And because they are, obviously, the images are becoming far better. And you know, through sight devices can be used in this training medium. Alongside that, then, we in fact use an AI coaching tool. So that monitors that individual. And then as that individual is carrying out his training, if he constantly makes the same problem, then we can go into the database and we can show him where he's going, or him or her where they're going wrong. And obviously they can do some self-based training to get themselves along that way. Virtual reality training then, we do see this is limited for weapons training, certainly not marksmanship, but there are other weapon handling skills that can be done in a desktop training world. I know people do mention about sickness and nausea when they're inside a VR world. That's something that obviously needs to be considered. And how flexible is the system? How quick is it within a VR world to make a new environment to operate in? And that leads us then onto the AR world, which is slightly different. And it's probably a system that's more hard to explain until you put your head inside the goggles. But once you have your head inside them goggles, you're in the real world. So the creation of a scenario is much easier. And obviously you can modify that scenario just by putting AR features inside the system, as well as the targets being friend or foe. We do think eventually it could possibly replace screen-based systems. But we need to make sure that we cover a number of limitations. That would be long-range accuracy. Now, if we're going to use it for skill at arms training and we want to be firing out to 600 meters with a rifle, we've got to make sure that's going to be particularly accurate. And obviously, we need to improve the robustness of the system and make sure that we've got enough there for soldiers to get a higher throughput with. So, obviously, a number of points I've covered there. I know it's not taken too long, but it's food for thought at this stage. You know, we've got a number of under presentations that will take place, but it's hopefully that's something that you can think about. Obviously, I've addressed this around that of small arms training. It can be used far more, especially the AR world, and then we venture into mixed reality, which will come up as a part of the conversation. So what I want to do now is we'll move on. Next speaker will be Dstl. First one up on the stage. Thank you very much, Mayowa. I'll drop it otherwise.
Don't actually need this. Didn't do any slides, so unfortunately you have to look at me for the next 10 minutes. No, thanks a lot, Mark. Yeah, so my name's Mayowa, so I'm a psychologist at Dstl, and then somehow I found myself working in that modelling simulation. And the bit of work I lead looks at digital learning technologies, which includes immersive tech, AI, data analytics. So I'm not sure what I did in the previous life, but I've got all the buzzwords and all the hype. It's actually quite nice at the moment that AI is taking a lot of the heat off the immersive tech world, because I remember coming to DSET a couple of years ago and everyone had XR on their stands. But I think is a really good sign that communities have moved on a little bit, and we kind of recognise that actually XR probably isn't the panacea that we all thought it was. There's been a big calm down. So I also struggled to think about what I was going to talk about today. So I want to leave you with kind of one little thing and see if that theme kind of comes through my talk, and you can heckle me afterwards if I don't do it. But I just want you to think that the future will be blended, including XR. So kind of taking back to kind of what we did at DSET a couple of years ago. So we did loads of research looking at the effectiveness of XR for training education. So we looked at about 300 studies. We collated all that evidence into a portfolio of evidence, which is on the defence learning environment, and anyone who works in mod can get access to that. I do recognise that probably excludes industry, but we're kind of looking for ways to make that more widely available. But I think broadly speaking, what we found is that XR is pretty much effective kind of for most things. In some cases, it won't be. But when I say effective, that's a bit of a kind of loaded word. So it means different things to different people. So the kind of research doesn't show that XR is wildly better than kind of standard training solutions, which you thought it would be. Broadly speaking, it's probably equivalent to or sometimes slightly worse. And depending on your use case, that might actually not be a problem because of the kind of unique properties of XR. So the things it allows you to around kind of repeatable and safe training, gives you an environment to kind of explore without the kind of constraints of the real world, and also the kind of like the massive amount of data. So that kind of like tips the balance of when you think XR might be useful for your use case. But what we've got to, so we've kind of done that research, what we've got to is like looking at XR as in point solutions, so kind of in isolation. But what we really don't know is what happens when we introduce XR into kind of one of our training courses or future training courses. What does that do to kind of the blend of learning? So what we're going to do next is look at how we integrate XR into our kind of our training pipelines, what the kind of implications of that for learning are, and also not just learning, kind of learning system as well. Obviously, introducing XR means you'll have to think about the infrastructure of your classrooms, think about some of the human factors. Kind of Mark's really talks about cyber sickness. And just to note, there is some guidance on mitigating the factors of cyber sickness, which was done a couple of years under NATO. So if you look on the NATO website, that's freely available. And there's a current task group looking at some of the effects of cyber sickness in AR as well. Things about logistics, thinking about the training your instructors will need. These are all kind of the factors that we want to consider in our study going forward. So I think blended learning is actually quite a well-known thing in the kind of training education literature, but it hasn't really kind of made its way across to the modeling simulation community. I think the kind of like LVC, so live virtual constructive, is kind of more of a commonly known phrase. So we've been trying to do that for a long, long time. And that leads me on to my next point about the future is blended. So see, flying jets is very, very expensive. And I think we've been trying to get at projecting AR into the real world, and the kind of elephant in everyone's room around kind of IVAS being a thing, making like the real world augmented with kind of different information is kind of where we're going to get to. But I think in the interim, like technologies like mixed reality will probably kind of fill some of that gap. So that's the kind of the next thing we get to. So the urban environment is actually really key at the moment for obvious reasons. So making our training more realistic, more augmented is really going to help our armed forces. And the last thing I want to talk about is the kind of the secret sauce of XR. So kind of leaning back to what I was saying about thinking about point solutions, but I think the real kind of the benefit is of mixing all those different technologies. So the AI is the kind of the big hype thing. So mixing AI with XR and then looking at data analytics as well is really going to enhance what we can do with our training and make our armed forces better prepared. So that's all the kind of like the ramble I've got on today. And hopefully you kind of seen what we're thinking at Dstl about how we kind of blend technology of XR with all our current training. But happy to answer any questions in the Q&A.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Some interesting points there, and I'm sure that will come up during Q&A. Our next presenter is Professor Sam Vine. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, Mark. Okay. Thank you for coming along, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. It's been a It's my first time at DSET, and it's been a fantastic few days. Lots of what Mark and Mayowa have said already, and lots of what I've observed and discussed over the last few days are actually, luckily, quite relevant to what I'm about to say for the next 10 minutes or so. So yeah, I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Exeter. My research team have interests in immersive technology and how humans behave and exist in them. We work in health and aviation and education, but we have a keen interest in military and defense and security. So to try and summarize what I'm going to say for the next 9 minutes, it's essentially I'm cheerleading for science, right? I'm trying to explain that I believe the scientific process is the best way to answer some of the questions that have been talked about over the last 3 days around the efficacy and the effectiveness of XR. XR is kind of, I guess, comfortingly everywhere these last few days. But as Mayowa said, it's nice that there seems to be a sort of realism and a calmness to the amount of XR, and AI has kind of come in and stolen its thunder. But this question is still being asked every day. The tools that are on show, the bits of work that people are collaborating on are leading to the question, well, yeah, but does it really work? And what is the evidence of the effectiveness of these head-mounted immersive technologies? And I firmly believe that the scientific method is still our best chance of having a robust and reliable and meaningful answer to that question. And in the last few years, we have, I guess, probably spun this wheel once. We have observed and gathered information and formed some questions and collected some data and developed some theories and some frameworks. But we've only spun the wheel once, and there's a long way to go to be able to follow the principles of this scientific method enough times that we have a real answer to the question. And so you won't be surprised to know that the academic is here cheerleading for science. But after 3 days at this conference, I firmly believe that this is important. If you look at the way that other technologies in other industries have been tested and evaluated and been successful, it is as a result of a rigorous following of this method. Now, XR is unique in comparison to conventional simulation. I think everybody agrees with that now. There are unique features, both good and bad, that make it different. We hopefully get people immersed. We hopefully allow them to interact. We perhaps are able to manage a bit more their cognitive load, but sort of slightly more, I guess, explicit things around having computers strapped to your face and being involved in technology that has all of this hype and maybe getting a bit sick now and again if you spend too long in it. These are all features of XR which need research and discovery, and so a unique approach to that research is needed. The many years of conventional simulation research are powerful here and useful, but we need to do things slightly differently, and we are doing things slightly differently to tackle this specific question about XR. What we perhaps lack, though, if one takes a look at the sort of pyramid of evidence quality in science, what we perhaps lack, understandably, is some of the evidence at the top of this pyramid. We've got plenty, I've heard plenty of evidence from the bottom layer of this pyramid in the last few days. Many experts with many opinions, and I've really enjoyed having those conversations. But because we're in the infancy of this field, really, we are climbing the pyramid very slowly, and I am passionate about trying to accelerate the field up through the levels of this pyramid as quickly as possible. So we do have evidence that XR does some good and can be effective, as good as, and hopefully no more harm than other forms of training. But we really have lots to do in terms of rigorous experimental studies, and then some of the top layers of this pyramid that are characterized as being sort of synthesis of lots of evidence. We need to be systematically reviewing, meta-analyzing the large literature base that is now out there. But there are also not just broad methodologies that are needed, literature reviewing and meta-analyzing. We also have to take some very unique measurements when we're doing XR-related research. Perhaps in conventional simulation research, you would see performance metrics, the key variable. Does that simulator make somebody perform the task better? And does that performance transfer to the real world? Great question. But in XR, we might have to ask slightly more directed, targeted, specific questions to really tap into whether the unique features of XR are having an additional or additive effect above and beyond the conventional simulation that's been happening for 30 or 40 years. So we've tried to sketch out what some of those concepts might be, what some of those measurements might need to be, and tried to design them into a pretty picture for everyone to look at. And I've been sort of ticking these off like a shopping list throughout the week when people have mentioned them. So physical fidelity, ergonomic validity, face and construct validity, transfer, user buy-in, viability, suitability, acceptability. So it's been really satisfying to see those concepts being spoken about in relation to the tools on display downstairs and the tools within the projects that people have presented. And I want to finish with the idea that, in my view, and certainly in relation to the evidence that we've produced in our lab, we really should be focusing on the very unique features that XR can produce as use cases. We should not be trying to replace conventional simulation with a form of simulation you stick on your head. XR has the ability to, in a very few number of cases, generate some superpowers. If you allow me to be romantic about it for a moment, to enable a human to perform above and beyond what they might be capable of, not just train above and beyond what they might be capable of. And I urge everybody to try and focus their efforts on those instances where we can harness the unique features of XR and produce training that's different and better, or indeed produce operational capabilities that are different and better. And so just a couple of examples from the work that I've been involved in and from a company that I work with. So here you've got sort of conventional room search and clearance simulation, and we've stripped away all of the really cool stuff that you can already do in good simulators and in live training exercises. But we've substituted in measurement and analysis and data, and we've substituted in feedback, and we've substituted in tutoring. And yet AI is a feature of that tutoring and of those data. We've enabled new ways of being able to provide that feedback live in the moment with insights to bits of data that weren't or typically aren't available in conventional simulators. So very satisfying to hear Mark talk about eye tracking in their AR system, a unique insight for the trainer and the trainee. And again, here, an aviation example where we've stripped away the conventional fidelity that we've been chasing for decades and substituted in analytical tools and data and concepts of adaptation that aren't necessarily a feature of, say, civil flight simulators. So we've now got the ability in a very low fidelity simulator, but that happens to be, because it's in XR, full of instruments and measurement tools and data that we can use. And we can push people to understand different human performance concepts that they're getting better at and teach them in new and innovative ways. Well, at least we're trying to. And my job is to do the research that tells us whether we're being effective in making that happen. So in summary, my message is that we need to trust the scientific process and keep spinning that scientific wheel again and again until we get the answers that are reliable and compelling and meaningful. We need to use appropriate tools to be able to test and evaluate XR because it's different from conventional simulation. It requires a different approach and a plea to design XR training that isn't just a substitute for your old simulators, but actually harnesses and takes advantage of the unique features of XR that give us data and feedback and analysis. And just to finish with a quick shout out to Cineon, who provided the imagery you've just seen from the simulators that they've built. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. That's quite an insight on how we're looking at this. So thank you very much for that. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Carolina. Once again, welcome onto the stage, Carolina.
Sounds good. Well, okay, thank you. And it's nice that I'm recognized as Carolina, so I'm everybody's friends. It's always good. So I have some slides as well. And as I did yesterday, I'm going to change gears a little bit because I'm a computer scientist. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm gonna talk tech a little bit on that. So see, we can get my slides to load. Those are not it. So so I found the presentations both today very interesting because the analysis of the effectiveness of the technology is always a very critical component of how you design the next generation of that technology, because it gives us a lot of informed data of what works and what doesn't work. And then people like me start thinking, okay, this didn't work. So what else we can do to make it work? So if I can have some images, then I will show you a little bit more what's going on on that. But as my slides come up, since I know them almost by memory, I can start talking anyway. So one of the things that I always do when I go to these events, because there's always this question, what is really XR? And one of the things that we try to do in this sort of environment, we try to classify and categorize things. And to me, honestly, for the 30 plus years that I've been doing this, I don't like to classify things. On one side, people say, oh, there is VR. So what is VR? Is when you have some technology that gets you completely inside a digital space. Now, on the other hand, we have AR. So what is AR? Is a technology that keeps you in the real world, but it gives you superimposed digital enhancements, to call it that. And then this morning, to my surprise, I saw Mark also adding a third category called projections. So for me, when I think about all these, I just think that it's all the same. It's a gradient. Is what do you have to do to provide whatever experience it is, whether it's a training experience, whether it is an environment to make a decision. So I would not think about, especially today in 2024, so rigidly, this is this, this is that, this is that. It's really a gradient. And that gradient is not only about the application itself. I will argue that the gradient is about the individual that is using the technology. You can have a team of people, and each member of the team might need a different flavor of XR in order to execute their task within the roles. So that's my philosophy. And that has been like that since I was a very young girl and barely spoke any English, trying to figure out how to do this. So when you ask people, what's the landscape of XR? You typically are going to see a lot of this. But then look at what's on the bottom. And on this crowd, I think everybody knows what's on the bottom. So what happens? Look at that. There is 30 years in the middle. And our perception of the field is still very centric in one particular kind of technology. So what happened? Now, what about all this? And especially in the military environment, we have created many, many other technologies that are not headset centric, that have proven equally or more effective, as Mark presented earlier, in different situations and circumstances. So for me personally, it really drives me a little, bananas or bonkers when people, the moment you say XR, people start thinking headsets, And some of you that have heard me talking in other events recently, you will hear me saying, okay, let me ask you this other question. How many pair of shoes do you own? Now, you guys are military, so you probably don't own a lot, but let's just think a little open-minded here. How many pair of shoes do you own? Do you own one pair of shoes for your entire life activities? No, you don't. You probably have boots when you go out on a mission. You probably have, I don't know, fins if you are one of the ones that do things in the water. You probably have nice dressy shoes when you go to a business or official meeting, and you probably have some comfy running shoes when you go running, and you have flip-flops or the slippers when you're home and all that. So all of us have a variety of shoes in our lives depending on what we are doing. So why are InVR telling everybody has to go on high heel stiletto shoes when they go climb a mountain? It makes no sense to me at all. So to me, this is something that is become very serious in my work, to really try to, not this community, you are all very well versed on the technology, but a lot of other communities out there don't think that way. Think about what you want to do, what experience you want to give, and there we go, and what technology because there, because at the end of the day, this is the world that we are trying to create. It might be okay in defense, but it's not okay everywhere else, because that's not human. We are not machines that we just sit there and things get wired into our brains through the digital world. We are more these kinds of situations and events. And even in defense and training, you have teams. Teams have to interact with each other. They have to trust each other. Each other's lives is in the hands of everybody in the team. So you have to do that. So to me, this is what drove me when I was very young to develop the CAVE technology. So my drive was, everything I've seen so far is individual technology. So how do I make something that I can have several people very easily sharing that experience? You can see it on this video. You have somebody's doing an analysis. Somebody else comes, gives an opinion. Now they are having a question about something very easily, very simple. They can ask a third person to come and join them and give them some experience. And it's just a simple social environment that has some of the superpowers that some mentioned, but it also has the simplicity of use. Not the simplicity of managing and maintaining it, but the simplicity of use. So here is your other user. Now, this opens the door to think in terms of other technologies, like, for example, something like this, some interactive tables, gives you a different level of immersion, a different level of relationship with your digital space, but it gives you more choices or more options. So here is another world that sits out there that is exploring new technologies in there. Now we have suddenly 2010, the Oculus came. For me, that was almost an implosion for the field more than an expansion. So in some ways, it was an expansion, of course, because it made it very affordable, very easy for many people to get their hands on the technology. But at the same time, we were thinking this way, and suddenly we're thinking this way. So it's really something that we have to be very careful when we really make some technology decisions, because, there is no one size fits all when you do this. There has to be a very broad range of options. And more importantly, another part of the implosion that I noticed since the Oculus came out, and by the way, I have a very good relationship with everybody involved in Oculus. It's not a criticism on that technology. It's very good. But what happened was a major cultural change, because we are now creating new technologies. Where are the new VR technologies? We have a huge range of options of the same thing, but we don't have new things. Something groundbreaking, like when the CAVE came out, we have never seen it before. Nobody thought about it before, broke all the molds. It's been 30 years. We have not broken the mold of the display technologies. To me, that's worrisome, because especially, again, on high critical training environments like defense training, we are getting a lot of benefits. Of course we are, but we could probably get more if we have alternative technologies. What those technologies could be, I'm not sure. We are experimenting with them in my group. There are other groups experimenting, but it's a lot less groups doing that. Very less, much smaller groups. So we really need to keep that in mind. I know I'm running a little bit out of time. These are some examples. I'm not sure if I can ask Jerry to click on the bus in the middle. So here is a creative display. This is a bus, it's a school bus, and it's taking the kids on a field trip. Look at this, how cool. They replaced the windows of the bus by screens. They mapped the geography of Mars to the geography of the town that they were driving on. So as the driver is driving through the city, the kids are driving through Mars. To me, this is amazing. This is new technology. This is a new display. It's actually older. It's been around for maybe 7 or 8 years, maybe a little longer than that. But that's different thinking. So who else is thinking differently like this? Who is trying to break the mold with the technology and trying to figure out ways to help us grow, not just iterate over the same concept? Again, please don't take this as a negative situation. We are doing a lot and we are progressing a lot, but I think we can progress even more if we open our minds beyond the existing platforms that we have today. So SEO we sometimes don't think how intimidating it is for non-military groups to get into the technology, you know. So how do we can get things that are easy in and out? And I noticed that in the defense environment, sometimes we have high-ranking officials that are a little more reluctant to wear a headset than more of the mid-level or junior people. I don't know exactly why, but in our lab, we do have sometimes that the high-level officials that visit us don't want to test the technology. I'm not sure if you guys experience that or not. But anyway, and another thing is we are not thinking, we're starting to think about it, but we don't think very much about logistics. How do we maintain all these things? How do we operate them? How do we run them? You know, if I have a training facility that has 30, 40, 50 devices, whatever those are, how do I keep them all in sync? How do I know that they all have the right things at the right moment? How do I know all my people is exactly on the same point in the training and all that? We don't really think about that. We have a business model that right now is pretty linear. So more users equals more budget because it's a one-on-one correspondence. Can we think in terms of technology that is a 1 to 3 or a 1 to 10 or a 1 to 100, but it's still equally effective as those? So those kinds of thinkings I don't see much in the industry. And then, of course, you know, don't even get me started with how do we get content and how do we develop things, because again, that has been another implosion moment. Now we are all almost as slaves of the game engines. So all our simulations or our visuals are as good as, and I'm not going to mention them, a very limited number of game engines that we all use and we standardize. Again, on the positive side, it has given us a tremendous amount of access, a tremendous ability to many of us to be able to build environments that we couldn't build before. But on the other hand, we cannot do any better than the quality that those engines deliver. So for example, if I want to do something that is cinematic rendering quality in VR, I can't. Plain and simple, I can't. Why? Two main reasons. One, because I'm limited to the quality of those commercial tools that are out there. And two, I mentioned this yesterday, we're also limiting ourselves to the computational capabilities that are local to the display that we are using. So there are techniques that we can do remote accelerated rendering and also remote accelerated simulation computational resolutions, but those require, you know, roll up your sleeves and really be a pretty solid developer to do that. And again, the more common tools don't allow us to do that. So we limit ourselves many times on what we can do. So anyway, just very quickly to finish. So I'm just trying to understand all these things. So my current research is trying to understand what is the context on which XR needs to be utilized. And Mark, I appreciate your earlier slides very much. I really like that grid that you have, you know, and the result of, you know, the panelists that we had earlier on, you know, what works, that doesn't work, on which situations, on which conditions. So we're doing quite a lot of research on that. But again, from the perspective of technology, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a cognitive scientist. I'm really looking at this from the machine. How can I make the machines? How can I make your cables? How can I make your displays more focused on the different roles that you have to do? Trying to really think teamwork, and then really just trying to be at the beginning of the innovation pipeline, being creators of technology. That's really what we focused on. So with that, I'm going to end here. I have a couple of pretty pictures. So here are some scenarios. This is another thing that goes with roles. If I have an application, why my application cannot automatically adapt to the role of the person in the simulation. So right now we have multiple simulations depending on your roles in the mission. So why a single application? In this picture, this is a single application for medical training. Depending on whether you're in the classroom, you are a student, you are a professional reviewing a case, the application is going to adapt to you. So it's one single development effort and multiple uses. Same thing in this other military application, similar situation. Same scenario, you have training people in the ground, you have commanders, command and control environment. Even there is an option on the simulation that it will adapt for something like a simulation, a situation room, or very high level decision makers. But it's not independent simulations. It's all one single application that adapts on the fly to the role of the person that's using it. So anyway, those are the things that keep me going. So I have a very mixed view of the technology, and I'm hoping that I gave you people something to think about and discuss. Sorry.
Carolina, thank you very much. It's certainly not one size fits all, and you've made that very apparent. So I'm sure we'll get some questions about that a little later on.
Again, I'm positive. Don't take it. I'm negative and grudging. I'm not grudging. I'm just trying to be provocative for everybody to think about it.
Okay, our final speaker then is WO2 Ian Ferguson from the Royal Artillery. Ian is at the export support team down in Larkhill, so I'm sure he's going to give us a much different perspective on things now. So over to you, Ian.
Okay, thank you. So the first thing I'm going to cover is XR and what that actually means to me, just to bound what we're going to speak about for the next 10 minutes or so. So the first thing I'll get across is XR, so extended reality. That's just an umbrella term for the realities that sit underneath. So we've got AR, MR, and VR. So augmented reality is a good way just to put some real time or real information overlaid in the real world. There's no real interaction, though you can fake that interaction that comes in there. If you flip right over to the other side, you've got virtual reality. So you can change a user into anything that you want them to be, in any situation that you want them to be in. And that generally removes them from the real world. So that's one of the issues with that. But what they then created is there needed to be some sort of blend of both. And that's where mixed reality comes in and is the bridge. Now, I quite like there being pigeonholes for us to put these technologies in. And the reason I say this is because if we look at some of the buzzwords that have been mentioned, like artificial intelligence, I think there's so much technology and process now that have been put underneath artificial intelligence. The term itself is pretty much unusable because what is it? There's so many processes involved. So I quite like having the three streams, and it's going to fit into one of those streams. When you do see a head-mounted display of any kind, it doesn't matter what reality it's driving, just understand that there's a whole ecosystem behind that allows that visualization to happen. It's just not the headset alone. So what I want to touch on is observations as educators of how we implement this technology into the training pipeline and those considerations that we should have when implementing all of these different technologies. So as we know, when you're creating your courses, you'll have training objectives, enabling objectives, and key learning points. So we need to clearly define these. And at the moment, it's a bit a bit of a sloppy approach, I'll say, because what will happen is when they create their CTP, which is the document that governs how the course will run, they'll just link all of these EOs, TOs, and KLPs, and they'll just say, right, you can deliver all of that on PowerPoint. So we cannot take that approach with XR. We need to really look at the EO, TO, or KLP that we're going to link this XR technology to, and then sort of start to look at, can the XR technology we're using really deliver that skill and recreate that skill properly? And if so, then good to go, in my opinion. If not, then you need to understand why not. And, you know, is there a trade-off between, let's say, if I've got a student that's struggling with AS90 gunnery, I can't give him a 60, 70 ton gun to take home to his room, but I can give him a VR or an MR headset to take back and study all night long or at the weekends. So, you know, there is definitely places for this. One of the things I find that people don't think about is content development. How is that going to happen? What happens when you want to change your course content? Are you going to go back to the provider of the technology? If you do, I hope you've put a lot of money in there for the content generation or content alteration. If it's instructor-led, that's good in my opinion. The more we can get as user-generated content, the better, because it does reduce all of these other bills. When we're designing that content, in my opinion, it has to be interactive, because that's the power of some of these tools, is having that interaction between the student and some content. When you're just displaying information, I can give them a book. So how are we going to bring it to life? And I've seen some XR projects, and they've been quite boring. And that hurts me, because I think you could create something so much better, so much more interactive, and bring the student into that environment with a lot more success, but it doesn't happen. Content scaling, and this can be down to limitations of headsets as well. How many students do you want to put inside these lessons? Do you want them to interact together, or do you want them to be standalone? And all of this should be decided on at the ground level before you even move forward, because some of these headset devices, they don't play well together, or you can only have so many. Within the British military, we generally look at groups of 16 in a class. So that can also be a challenge, having 16 people seeing and interacting with the same object or inside the same environment. So this brings us around to why. Why are we implementing XR into our training pipeline? So for me, it's about instructor empowerment. And what do I mean by that? The XR technology has to either make the instructor's job easier, has to provide him some sort of data or feedback or a metric where he can improve the student interaction. So if we're not sort of achieving that, sometimes then I'd like to stand back and say, why are we implementing this technology into the training pipeline? If we're not achieving, if it's not making the instructor's life better, and it's not making the student life better, then surely we should be looking at other options. So technical infrastructure, when you're looking at some VR headsets, some of them require some very high-powered gaming PCs to run. If you don't already have this in situ, you best start to realize you might only be spending £5,000 or £10,000 on a headset, but then there's going to be another £5,000 or so on a computer that's going to be used to run the headset. And again, then you come back to content generation and everything else that comes with it. So be more mindful on the technical infrastructure you have, or the bill that's going to bring with it. Cyber sickness and motion sickness has been spoken about before. And in my time at the Royal School of Artillery, I wouldn't allow a VR headset to be linked solely alone to an EOTO or a KLP. And the reason for that is purely because of cyber or motion sickness. So if you have a student that comes in and they're utilizing your XR solution, there's no other way to deliver it apart from that XR solution. Your student gets cyber sick and cannot use that headset. Are you going to fail them on a course because they cannot use the headset? So there has to be a secondary teaching mechanism involved in case a student cannot use your XR systems. So again, we're looking at tracking user performance. We've spoken about data and how we can draw this data in. And I think this is one of the most important things that we need to really start doing. You know, when we look at what's already been mentioned, eye tracking, this is probably the easiest thing we can do from any of these XR headsets. And if we look at programs such as Combat ID, where we're identifying military vehicles and equipment, when this is taught, we're taught in a very specific way on how we're going to look at a vehicle type and work out what vehicle that is. There's no way of knowing that if we do that on a PC or on a piece of paper. What process did they use? If we use eye tracking and a simple heat map, we can see how long they've looked at a certain area, where they've looked, and have they used the correct procedures. So these technologies can really start to enhance what we're seeing from students and understanding what their methodologies are. And then I generally always try and make people remember about data protection. We should be looking at how we're going to secure the data that these devices are going to bring. I would always advise you anonymize it somehow along the way, but it's definitely a consideration that needs to be thought about. So when we look at each of the realities, when we talk about augmented reality, so again, this is brilliant for overlaying that data. It's usable on most devices. There's no real chance of motion or cyber sickness. However, that can be caveated depending on the technology used. So if you're using mobile phones and such to deliver that out, then you're not going to experience that motion sickness issue. But if you give them some sort of augmented glasses to wear, depending on the quality of those glasses, that could cause a reaction. So it's something to be aware of. Cons, I've placed down no real world interaction. It might look like people are interacting with things, but they're not. This is a fakery that's done within that system. Potential use cases, targeted lesson information, so you can build augmented information in your own classrooms over, you know, even these sort of boards that you see scattered around the conference. Augmented reality can bring all of these to life with supplementary information and video content and things like that. So it can be useful, but just as another way of displaying information. When we look at mixed reality, this is now the step between augmented and virtual reality. I quite like this as a technology, and it allows that interaction with the virtual objects that are being placed over the real world. Depending on the quality of the headsets used, again, cyber sickness and motion sickness is minimized because you can pass through, you see the world around you. And the systems that we were looking at the Royal School of Artillery were all instructor content sort of delivered. So it was really versatile in that manner. It made some physical sort of lessons very easy. So if you had to build something or do something, it was really suited towards that. Now, and this is primarily was the HoloLens, Microsoft HoloLens 2 headset that I was using it for testing. And the ecosystem to run that, the Microsoft tenant, is excessively complex and effectively closed the whole program down because we couldn't maintain that on an ongoing basis. When the people that had the technological know-how to keep it working left, the whole thing would collapse. So again, all of these ecosystems that sit underneath your headsets, you really need to know how they work or have contractors that are going to keep running those systems for you. Which just brings us around to virtual reality. This allows you to do complete immersion, you know, so you can put that student in any situation, put them anywhere doing anything, and that can be quite powerful. The cons to this side of life, there's lots of chance of motion sickness and cyber sickness. You have to have secondary teaching mechanisms in place if you're going to use this inside the training pipeline. No real world interaction. People then start saying, oh, what about pass-through cameras? We can do that. But then you've actually moved from virtual reality back into a mixed reality environment. So you're not in that space anymore, in my opinion, but that's the way it moves across. Things like you can get some false style training. So If you look at the weight of objects, I've seen people throwing 30, 40 kilo artillery rounds around with one hand, waving them around like they don't weigh anything, but that's the interaction that's done. So again, there's got to be a mix or element of how you're going to use this, and there's always trade-offs. You know, use cases for that. You see most flight simulators and driving simulators now have VR sort of placed in them. Downstairs, you have multiples of these just dotted around that you can go across. Now, it has been, might seem a bit disparaging about XR within the training pipeline. And I think what I want to do is caveat it quite clearly. Do I think there's a place for XR inside the training pipeline? Absolutely. Caveated with some of the considerations we talked about. And this is not a whole list of considerations. There are a whole host of others. So if you're going to inject any form of XR in your training pipeline, please just understand the type of technology that you're placing in there, the impact that it will have on the student, the impact that it'll have on the instructor, and then what benefits it's going to bring. Thank you very much.
Ian, thank you very much. If the panel could join us up here now, then we will take questions in a few seconds. No, I'm good. I'll stand up. Okay, so first of all, before we go to the floor, any questions online, Abby? Okay. Any questions from the floor for any one of us? Scott, over to you.
Thanks, Mark.
1 second.
It's good, Abby. I think my voice.
No, they can't hear you online.
Oh,
Sorry.
online? I'm sorry, people online. For those who are online can't see me, sorry. My name is Major Scott Roach. I run the Canadian Modelling Sim Cohort Office. I'm a big advocate of AR and VR for training. There is a lot of space for it, and we use it in Canada quite extensively. We've used it with our Navy people to do training for young sim people before they get on ship, so that they become familiar prior to boarding and learning where things are. The Air Force use it extensively. The Army is starting to use it for some of their activities. And this is a mix of you know, AR, VR. We're not quite in the extended reality world just yet, but I think that's coming. Carolina, I really appreciated your comments. Not negative at all. I think it was a true reflection of where we are. So thank you for that. I first saw my experience with VR was back in '96 at BAE here in the UK. And they had a dome that I walked into, and I had a pair of glasses on, and I was standing inside a vehicle, and I could pull bits and pieces out of that vehicle and move it around inside. And I went, this is awesome. And then I never saw it again. I went, what happened? I think my question, or my first point is, I don't think the hardware has caught up to where we need to be. I think that's what's holding us back as far as being able to move forward within this technology. And I just wanted to know from the panel if your experience and if you feel the same way. I think, you know, our ability to be able to do this, but without having, you know, I feel like I'm carrying a tank on my back when I'm doing, you know, AR and VR work. And I think that's what needs to be developed. The software, we've been doing, I think, you know, SIGI and all of that for a long, long time, but it's the hardware that is slowing us down. And I would like to know the panel's opinion.
Scott, that's actually a good point, and it's something that we're trying to address. I don't know if any of you have had a look at our system, but at the moment we've got a standalone headset that we wear, and what we need to do is integrate that onto a combat helmet. So as you would wear your PNGs, you would drop the goggles down accordingly, And that's the way that we're going to approach the case. So it actually becomes a part of the soldier's equipment, not an addition to what he wouldn't wear. Likewise, the backpack we wear, that's getting smaller and smaller all the time. And I think I alluded to that in my briefing, that's how we've got to move forward. We've got to get things smaller, make the logistics a lot simpler, and not put an extra burden on the soldier who's going to be wearing this to carry out the training. So totally agree. Don't know the answer yet, but we've got clever people working on it.
I'll add a more researchy perspective to your question, but I think I will expand your question. It's not so much the hardware, I think it's the infrastructure. Because again, we continue trying to reduce the physical things that we put on the trainees. But we don't think, in sometimes, again, this is a very specific audience. Bear with me because I deal with a lot of audiences, oil and gas, automotive, healthcare, and all that. So there are many audiences that don't think about that. So why do we have to put the computing on the person? The computing can be somewhere else. So it's not the hardware, it's the infrastructure. Because now, if I put the computing somewhere else, computing/rendering, now I need network. I need bandwidth, and I need low latency in my network, plus all the layers of protecting cybersecurity and all those issues as well. We're not thinking that way. On my talk yesterday, I was mentioning a short thing that we did. 1995, I had all the supercomputing centers in the United States connected live, solving simulations with thousands and thousands and thousands of CPUs and now GPUs, and piping all that to VR live with close to zero latency. Now, when I did that, it was a very specific setup as a demonstration of the future. Here we are 30 years later, and we're not doing that. It is doable because we got fiber. Fiber goes everywhere. Fiber is on the ground. We got transatlantic fiber. So why don't we move the heavy, the computation, the complicated things off of the person? That's a perspective, for example. So I would say it's more infrastructure than hardware. And software too, because it has to be easy, because you need to handle it. I don't want me to be helping you all the time to do it.
Oh, you don't like it. Yeah, I want to play with it. Oh, God, sorry. Yeah, that came out so wrong. Oh my God. Yeah, so I'm not a technologist, of a psychology background, but I think it kind of links to something you were saying earlier about kind of how we're kind of basically aligned ourselves to the kind of big technology companies who do a lot of this work for us. So we're basically kind of waiting for them to do the next thing. And there's probably can't comment too much on it, but I think there's some things we could do. So obviously defense while it is a big market, there are other kind of markets as well, like healthcare, police, security, where we could all actually work together to give them a requirement, say, actually, we want to do all these things. We kind of need you to do that. And probably the other thing is looking at industrial strategy and the things and research, fundamental research that we fund, see if we can accelerate that a little bit more when the kind of time and money becomes available.
So two points on this one, actually. So when we're talking about off headset rendering, Microsoft actually do a service called remote rendering, which can absolutely do that. And then it basically injects whatever comes out of that into a HoloLens 2 or other headset. However, before you think that's the panacea to all your problems, have a look at the pricing for that, because you will start laughing. Secondly, one of the interesting things that I've noticed within the technology sector at the moment, for years we've been about miniaturizing technology for graphical performance. recently over the last sort of 2 years has gone the complete other way. And if you see something like a NVIDIA 4090 graphics card, it is now probably about this size. They're huge. So when you look at the leading sort of tethered VR headsets, it needs that kind of processing power to drive. So it's another sort of issue that you're going to run into it. The miniaturization of GPU performance has gone the complete other way to what you need in this sector.
So I agree. I think the hardware or the infrastructure or whatever we call it is limiting. I think that's partly because for that 30-year gap between phase 1 of VR and phase 2 of VR, humans were kind of left out of the equation. And when the explosion happened in phase 2, humans were catching up. And actually, I see that's a sort of technologist view, I guess, but I see that from the research side as well, that human factors related research is all retrospective about how and if and when and why the XR kit is good or bad for the human. So I guess it's perhaps a naive view that maybe we can consider the human more thoroughly as we develop the third phase of VR, if such a thing is coming. I think though that for the military and also other industries using these flawed technologies, there are lots of really good pragmatic workarounds that I think Ian really alluded to. You know, sort of sensible, common sense thinking about if and when and why a particular technique should and shouldn't work. And a lot of what Ian spoke about were the hardware limitations or the infrastructure limitations that I think you're alluding to.
Anyone? Harry? All go over there.
Thanks very much. Mark Still from the Air and Space Warfare Centre. I've got a couple of questions which I'd be interested in the panel's perspective on. One's on a way of thinking, and the other one's on about risk versus opportunity. So the first part is, do you think that what we're doing now with new technologies that come along is just about, we keep trying to do what we used to do, but with new technology, rather than thinking about a different way of doing things which could be better? And we see quite a lot of that. And then the second part is, I believe in science as well, and I think we should trust science and we should look and study, but sometimes we have to do that, I believe, and you can only need so much studying to be done. So sometimes we just need to accelerate, take some risk. If we believe that there is benefit there and there's opportunity to be taken, we have to jump up, and sometimes we have to let that evidence to studying back us up afterwards because we know it's the right thing. Or what we'll do is we'll wait, technology will overtake us, and by the time we implement something, the next thing's up, and we've just skipped it, and we've lost that. Thank you.
It's some really interesting points, and I'll probably try and just nip it all in one go. So I see a lot of what you're sort of saying. Are we implementing XR technology just to redo over what we've done before with no real gain? So I'll caveat that by saying no, but what we're doing, we're implementing it wrongly. So the benefits that are coming from this technology is the data and everything that we can draw from it, details about the student, where they're looking, everything like that. If we don't draw that data off, then we're doing exactly what you said. We're just implementing technology for the sake of implementing it. We've got to make sure we do better on the data analytics and the data management side to enable all of this XR technology to be used for the betterment of our instructors and our soldiers.
Again, I agree. I fully agree with both of your points. Just some comments on them, though. I think certainly the frustration I feel with XR is when it's used to simply try to replace or reproduce otherwise successful existing simulation. XR-related flight simulators, beyond an economic argument for them being cheaper and flexible, are silly, in my view, for example, particularly in civil aviation. So I agree completely with that. On your point about science, you made, I think, two comments there which are really interesting. One was about sort of having to sometimes reverse engineer the scientific process, take the leap of faith, do it anyway, and then let the data catch up later. And also the idea that we often might not have enough time to sort of complete the cycle of the scientific process. Actually, both of those are characteristics of the scientific process. So it is actually a fundamental philosophy of science to only do the minimum amount of research needed to get the answer that is the truth, right? So drug trials get stopped sometimes really early if the evidence is lacking or the evidence is really compelling. We should do the same with XR. You know, if it's working straight away, then yeah, report and share and communicate and crack on and buy the stuff. If it's looking like it's failing, stop early and don't spend unnecessary amounts of money. Take the leap of faith and let the evidence catch up is a bit trickier. But there are examples even in medicine where this happens through the necessity of things like war. Interestingly, we might have to take high risk chances with a technique. And then let the evidence catch up later. So I think defence can adopt that approach. They are core principles of science anyway.
Yeah, I think Ian and Sam could have summed it up pretty well, and I think we're on the same page on this one. But the thing I probably would add is maybe an observation that one of the reasons why we do use XR to replace previous simulations is that we always look at it from the same angle, so we don't really use multidisciplinary teams. I think this is where we need to introduce trying to get myself some more work, but more human scientists in that blend of the technologists.
Yeah, I honestly think that we're doing a lot more. I mean, we're doing a little bit of more of the same, but it's more than the same in a different manner because as Ian mentioned, you know, now we are much more informed of what we are doing. We really have a much deeper understanding. So even though it might seem that we're doing the same, it's not really the same because now it's much more focused, it's much more targeted to efficiency to really accomplish those tasks. So I think we're doing a lot more. But at the same time, I still think that we could do even more. We can do much more. And on the risk, I do agree with Sam. You know, I mean, if any community is going to take risk, it's going to be defense. You know, you are on very time critical windows where if anything is going to be helpful, we might not have the full scientific evidence to back it up. But there is a little bit, you know, AI has not taken over the world yet. There is still our human intuition, and some of you that are very senior and have a lot of experience on what happens on a particular, I don't know the right terminology, battlefield or theater. You know, you might have an intuition that what you're doing with the technology is actually helping. So you might go for that high risk and again, go back and get the evidence to support it later.
And just to add, that hunch, that expert intuition, that decision to take the risk is the base layer of the scientific evidence pyramid. And we often talk about that as being anecdotal or subjective, but it's evidence nonetheless. And we can rely on it on some occasions and take decisions to implement things and change the way things work on the basis of that alone.
I'm sorry I keep clock watching, but Abby keeps giving me the look as well. So I know it's nearly time for lunch, and I'd like to think there are a lot more questions that you want to ask, but we're going to have to end the session. Go on, Scott, one more then.
Sorry. Yeah, please.
I'll go on then.
Thank you. Thank you. Ornella Schavenmaker. I'm an assistant professor at Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences. And well, I also developed XR course for the last year. And well, I have actually two questions. The first one is, we developed within our XR course, which was meant about developing this technology actually. So that's more from the technological point of view, but I think this applies also to the other side. And we developed something like we call immersive thinking. So I agree with Carolina when you say we don't think, when developing the technology, we don't think from the immersive point of view. And I do believe that that applies also to the other side when you are developing exercises for the military. We tend to think the old-fashioned way. So my first question is, what's your take on and your point of view about this kind of immersive thinking, either from the technology point of view or the exercise developing point of view? And related to that part, what I noticed so far is that immersive training, so the application of VR or AR trainings, is now only applied to only training one individual. But I've done experiments and I've seen development about multiplayer, and I think that is the way to go, to apply this technology to training a group of people. So that's my 2 questions to you.
Well, I can say one thing about multiple player. In an AR systems, we're working on at least going to 15 to start with, and we're trying to increase ours out to at least a company level ability, you know, and moving from inside to outside, which is going to take some time, but that's the way that we want to grow. So I can completely agree with what you say there.
So, like, regarding the first part, immersive thinking. So this comes back to, again, student experience, in my opinion. So if your developers are not thinking immersion, what's the product going to be like that comes out at the other end? It's not going to be student focused. And if anyone gives to me, let's say we'll talk about VR because it's the wholly immersive solution. If someone gives me a VR solution that wasn't immersive, I just wouldn't buy it, because what would be the point? You know, that's the whole point. So definitely, I think that's core to what you're doing. Regarding multiplayer, who wants to teach one-on-one lessons? Saying that, you need the ability to do that, because when we talk about struggling students, you need to be able to have one student that goes away and learns on their own. So it would be a mix of both, but definitely, at least, depending on the requirement type, if it's a normal sort of classroom that we have at the Royal School of Artillery, you'd be looking at around 16 students as a minimum, and you should be sort of encompassing that.
In terms of immersive thinking, it's not a concept I know very much about, to be completely honest, but I imagine that immersion needs to be a critical ingredient of the training requirement in order for it to be worth doing. So there are you know, educational process, teaching processes that don't require immersion and can still be effective. But when immersion is necessary, despite not knowing what immersive thinking is, I'm very confident people should be doing it.
Yeah, I think just to add to what Ian was saying about the multiplayer aspect. So we did actually do some work on it about 5 years ago to look at some of our specialist teams, and we did find it useful. But I think from memory, it was like a local solution, so it was fine in that particular aspect. But when you want to distribute it over like mod networks, I think you're kind of quickly run into trouble. So that's probably going back to the infrastructure aspects that we need to consider in the future if we want to do more of these things.
Well, I mean, there is a lot of different ways to think of what does it really mean to be immersed, you know. You hear words like presence, that your environment provides the sense of presence. So that's a big element for immersion and so on. You know, related to today's discussion, you know, a fun exercise, you know, that for you to try with a class and for you to try with maybe your developers, you know, goes along to what it was mentioned earlier on the panel. You know, when you are immersed, you know, that technology, in a sense, has superpowers. It gives you superpowers because you don't necessarily have to follow the laws of physics. Now, in the context of defense training, that's a little, probably we don't have a lot of maneuvering in there, but on the other hand, we can think about, okay, I'm immersed in this space, I'm learning, so what other elements I can bring into my training space that are not literal to reality, but help my trainee to understand more abstract elements of the situation that they find themselves into. So we are doing research, for example, in my team, of visualization representations of abstract information. So how do we blend that into a literal representation of a terrain and houses and cars and planes? How do we put abstract information that integrates with the environment? You know, we can do a heads-up display and have numbers and bar charts and all that stuff, of course, but what other things can be implemented in there as these sort of extra superpowers, you know, to do that? A fun experiment, I do that. I don't teach a lot. I'm mostly focused on research, but whenever I teach here and there, you know, sometimes I give my students an assignment. Hey, you have to create an immersive environment that doesn't follow the laws of physics. It's a struggle. Their imagination is blocked. It's like, come on, guys, you know, let's think Superman, science fiction, whatever. It's hard. It's hard. And we haven't quite cracked the code of how to detach ourselves from replicating reality in the immersive space other than for gamings. You know, but we need to be able to detach from reality for productive use of the technology. So we're exploring that and we're learning that. On the other aspects, you know, there is a lot of work also done with groups and teams, you know. So in another area, we have elements where, for example, we have a situation, you have an expert that is in headquarters or remote, and you have people out on the field. So we do this type of training environments where the people on the field might have some kind of XR technology that is field compatible, and the experts have more of the big irons helping them out, and how those team dynamics interoperate with each other and being able to understand each other and communicate. So I think you'll see more and more of that sort of really integrated teams, and I think your company has a lot of team-related systems as well and so on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
No, I'm done. Okay. I've been in the military a long time to know you don't stand in front of lunch.
Thank you all very much. I'm sure we could answer a few more questions if you wanted to ask them, but Abby has said no. So I'll let her take over now before she really shouts at me.